That is absolutely unfortunate, and there's nothing I can do about it because my internet just went poof, 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 poof. My apologies, guys. Well, I don't know. My internet is usually really good, but it has been a little bit unstable lately. Like sometimes I just disappear. Sucks, man, bro. Bakayaro. Anyway, sucks. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Sucks. Yes, exactly. Yes, the SEA internet moment. We should get used to it. I should be used to it, but somehow I'm still not used to it, and I still get very pissed off over it. Wednesday is a slow day. Oh my god. Ah, shit. Sorry if you guys hear like really loud vacuuming sounds because yeah. Well, I have zero viewers now apparently. Ah, sad. Anyway, where did I leave off? Let's see. Later, I gazed on the collection of paintings reproduced in the museum catalogue and noticed that beside the title there was an English translation, most likely provided by the artist himself. I was completely taken aback. The translation read Catcher of Lightning. In other words, rather than the object, it was the subject of the action that was being pointed to. But if this were the case, wouldn't the reading change yet again? Perhaps this time with a different accent, like chibi, ears finely pointed, twitching to staring off in some unknown direction, and a tongue alights softly on each syllables. Or at least that's how I imagine it. The wooden storage shed, which stood on the southeastern end of the garden, had a rough frame. Its primitive door, made of wood and wire mesh, the old man who had loved working in the garden kept the tools here for gardening and woodworking, including the step ladder and a net for cleaning the pond. He had studied metallurgy at the Old Imperial University before the war, and had left surveying equipment and drafting instruments used in mineral exploration geological surveys tucked away in the nooks and crannies of an old desk which had been demoted from the big house and left in there. Below the roof of the shed were the cross beams that supported it, and some planking which spanned the beams, creating a raised platform. This was another one of Chibi's favorite spots. Resting from her lightning capture activities, she would gaze outside from her perch on the end of the planking, paws tucked comfortably under her chest. In this position, she faced the guest house, looking squarely in the direction of my desk. One afternoon, as I worked at my desk, facing the windows, I heard my wife's voice coming from the garden. It was an almost mournful sound. I could only see Chibi since my wife was hidden behind the wooden fence, but apparently she was looking up at Chibi where she sat between the shed roof and the crossbeams. It seemed she was telling Chibi that she would soon have to part with her. Do you understand? Do you have any idea what I'm talking about? Chibi acted like she always did. Her interest was in her own natural talents, the animal and plant kingdoms. The human world was of no concern. She simply cocked her pointy little ears in the direction hidden to me from where those sounds were coming, as they indiscriminately spread throughout the corner of the garden and then dispersed. We continue at chapter 16. March arrived. On a Saturday evening, the two of us hurried under a nearly full moon to the opening reception held at the gallery for the painter of Lightning Catcher, heading down Lightning Alley in the directions that cut east. The gallery was not really that far, but the train would take us on a roundabout route back into the city center, a trip which would require an hour to complete. The shortest and most direct route would be by bicycle, which would have us arriving in only 30 minutes. Holding our bicycle, we passed through the small gates that pushed them as far as the lightning-shaped corner where we turned. There, at the boundary of the next-door neighbor's house, we saw Chibi slip through a tear in the wire mesh covering a gap in the wooden fence. As soon as she touched the ground, she turned her back towards us, circled around towards the southern outer wall of the guest house, traveling towards the slender fiber of the wild grass. From there, we imagined her alighting on the open veranda, then passing through her private entrance in the floor-level window, which only she could get through, and finally entering the room with the wooden floor. We had never before seen her on her border crossing from that angle, and we had never seen her heading towards our house. Sorry. And we had never seen her heading towards our house from behind. My wife and I looked at each other as if to say, so this is how she slips quietly out of her own house and comes over to give us a visit. The desire to go back home flitted across the back of my mind, but was crushed in the end by the need to go. At the gallery, an opening party was held where one could meet and talk with the artist. Since I had written something for the catalog, I had been sent a small original print by the artist as a gift, but somehow I felt ill at ease after the opening party. We had a coffee with close friends, a book designer and an editor. I told them about our situation, how we would soon be forced to move, and told them about the cat who visited us repeatedly. I guess I just let open the floodgates, even telling them about how my last ray of hope was that I might win the lottery so that I could buy the guest house. I explained that in reality the land likely cost 3 times more than what we could ever afford, even on the off chance that the owners would be willing to divide the property so that our little house would be left on its own. At 9:30, we left the coffee shop and again mounted our bikes, and one following the other like a miniature caravan, 30 minutes later, arrived at the lightning alley, entering from the back way on the east side, and finally returned home. Evidence of Chibi having came over while we were out was scanty, but there were definite traces. For instance, the cat food placed in the dish inside the cardboard box had decreased somewhat in volume. I didn't put any of those little fried mackerels this time, said my wife as if in explanation for her having eaten so little, and began frying some up. But that night, Chibi didn't come over for her usual midnight snack, nor did she come on Sunday. She's gone to visit her aunt at the beach, said my wife. She's gotten in a basket and taken a little outing. She seemed satisfied with her own explanation. After all, Chibi had been away for a number of days during summer last year for much the same reason. And she'll wear a little straw hat, like those elementary school kids because it's the weekend, right? On Monday, it rained heavily and a strong wind blew. Around noon, a patch of blue appeared briefly between the dark clouds, and then, after a while, the weather improved. The chattering of the Japanese bush warblers resounded throughout a broad patch of ground in the center of the garden. The sound of drums came from the neighbor's house. The sound was especially loud and intense and lasted for quite some time. So it's not the whole family that's away, I thought to myself. Chibi didn't come on this day either. So Tinkerbell's not coming, eh? The words I had been trying to avoid saying slipped out of my wife's mouth, and gradually they began to recur with more frequency. My wife, who had difficulty hearing Chibi's spell, asked me repeatedly if I had detected any signs of its approach. Time passed, and the mackerels were thrown out. Then my wife prepared a new batch. Right at the point where it had become unbearable, a friend called up from a bar in Shinjuku, one of the major entertainment districts in the city. Its narrow labyrinthine alleys lined with numerous little drinking spots suggested I come out to meet him and bring the wife along. The invitation came just at the right moment. We stayed out drinking until early morning hours. It seemed the longer we stayed out, the better our chances were that she would appear. Meanwhile, we could escape the painful hours of waiting for her when she simply wouldn't come over. But it seemed more as if we were just getting our insides all twisted up. Together, we put up an all-nighter, arriving back at the home next morning. There were no signs of her having visited. In fact, which was ascertained when we were awoken after only 3 hours of sleep by the mailman carrying an express package. We could hear each other's breathing. By nightfall, the interior of the house felt like an invisible body of water about to overflow its banks and inundate the surrounding area. So that my wife would not detect me, I went over to the main house and allowed myself to use the ancient phone, the old analog kind with the dial that they had when I was a kid. For some reason, always the color black and surprisingly heavy. I dialed the number of the neighbor's house, which I had just looked up, and the boy answered with his usual gusto, saying, "Nobody's home." "And the cat?" I managed to blurt out. "It died," he said, with no change of tone. When?" I asked. In the same energetic voice, he answered, "Sunday." When I pried further for an explanation as to why, he said he didn't know. Or perhaps he just didn't understand. Because of his age, I don't know. The meaning of death. Anyway, that's all I got out of him, all delivered in the same monotonously cheerful voice. One by one, I furiously closed the shutters of the main house, Putting on the wooden clocks I had worn on the way over, noisily returned to the guest house over the hard packed clay surface of the walk. In a voice that was partly a shout, partly a sob, I announced the horrible news to my wife. Another dead cat, guys. Told you guys stop getting books about cats. Chapter 17. There were signs the lady of the house next door had returned from a shopping expedition. I left my wife at home, broken down in tears, and in moments found myself turning the corner of Lightning Alley and then ringing the bell at the bells at the entry of the neighbor's house. Until that moment, my dealings with neighbors had been limited to passing each other in the alleys or exchanging polite greetings when taking over a package we had kept for them while they were out. I had never made a real visit or actually had a conversation with them before. It seemed she was hit by a car last Sunday night. There were no external wounds. She just lay there in the street with such a calm expression on her pretty face. That was so strange. Her use of word strange seems right on the button to me. Chibi was indeed a strange cat. Uncanny, really. I found myself getting a bit giddy sharing this with someone despite the fact that it was Chibi's owner. You know, when we first found Chibi, she wasn't here in the alley. Chibi first appeared to us out on the main street, just up the hills away, towards the station. It was in front of the house, with the Japanese plume grass growing near the entryway. After we found her, she ended up following us all the way home. Then, when I went out to look for her last Sunday, that's where she was, lying dead in exactly the same place where we found her. I never got go to I never go that way on my own except when I go shopping and have my boy along with me. Late at night, I think it was around 11:30, someone came by and asked me about it, saying, "Isn't that your cat?" So I rushed out, and that's where she was, in the exactly same spot we first found her. Practicing what seemed like an immense amount of self control, she continued in her soft spoken manner. It was so late at night. Since the holiday, the clinic wasn't open. My eldest was on the respirator till morning, so I couldn't depend on him to help out. I was aware that they had a high school age son also. She must have been the one who was playing drums on the other day. I buried her at the foot of a little pine tree in the garden. So they had a pine tree in their garden too, I thought to myself. I never gotten a look at their garden since Lightning Alley sharp twists and turns meant that the property was too far south to be directed in our view. There was a small apartment building, apparently some sort of corporate housing, which could be approached only via a private road by circumventing the alley and passing through an iron gate. It would take some courage, not to mention skill at coming up with excuses to pass through the gate, climb the apartment stairs, and get a good look at the garden from that angle. Then her voice became even softer as she spoke again in a wistful tone. she had a good life. I think she was happy. Chibi often came over to our house to play. My wife really doted on her. Oh, is that so? Well, thank you. She would fall asleep at our place, but she will always wake up at the same time each morning. Apparently, that was when your boy left for school. She would always go out to see him off. Oh, really? Thank you so much. She bowed politely to me. The way we are talking, it sounded more like a human child had died. I wanted to talk some more. I really felt like suggesting we talk some more when we both had some time and share all those things about Chibi that Ada didn't know about the two sides of her personality. Words to that effect found their way as fast as my throat, but then stuck there. Countless of scenes of Chibi sprang up in my head, which had been which had become special memories, but just as the words began flowing out, I found myself holding back. Would you mind if we visited her grave sometime? I mean, when it's a good time for you, of course. Oh, why, certainly yes. C- can you give me a call tomorrow morning? It's getting a little bit late. I wonder where it all came from. They need to this need to go to the place where the body had been laid rest. It's the need to reconfirm how precious someone was and how irreplaceable, and the desire to reconnect with them on a different plane. Chapter 18. On Wednesday morning, I barely managed to get 2 hours of sleep. I think my wife slept even less. When I got up, I found her sitting on the veranda looking at nothing in particular. I spoke to her and then went out into the sunny garden to cut a few branches of plum, Daphne odora, and daffodils. The garden just didn't seem the same. It wasn't our garden anymore. It has lost all its energy and spirit. Seeking signs of Chibi, which might be have remained, I took pictures here and there in the garden. I waited till after 9 o'clock and as promised, put in a call to the neighbor's house, and nobody picked up. I tried a few more times, but still no answer. I called again, and after 11, the missus answered. Sorry to disturb you at a time like this. Oh no, not at all. Would it be possible for us to just briefly leave some flowers? Oh, sorry, but can I get back to you some other time? The woman's nearly inaudible voice gradually emerged between sighs. Her tone had completely changed since yesterday when she told me in silken voice that she would see how things go. Her voice didn't exactly trail off. It was quiet, yet commanding. It was the tone of someone who had thought it all over without sleeping the night through, had given her final answer and would not budge. The flowers I had cut hung suspended in the air. So it looks like we can't visit the grave. My wife cried some more. We both became desperate. As long as things remained as they were, we would be unable to take possession of the imaginary path we needed to reconnect with Chibi. I tried to get to look over the fence behind the tool shed in the southeastern corner of the property, but I couldn't get a good view of the neighbor's garden at all, let alone the pine tree where Chibi was buried. We left the plum, Daphne odora, and daffodils in Chibi's little cardboard box in the corner of the tatami room. We need to explain to her that we didn't forcibly bring Chibi in, I thought. She came in on her own. We, And we played with her without really thinking anything about it. And then Chibi began taking little naps here. We always let Chibi do as she pleased. We didn't even touch her. We have to explain it to her. Little by little, I began writing about our history with Chibi, in the form of short essays, and publishing them in a quarterly magazine with limited distribution. I placed 2 or 3 issues of the magazine in an envelope along with the letter and mailed it. My wife couldn't keep any food down. She just couldn't get over the fact that Chibi was already dead when she had cooked up more fish to put in her bowl. As I watched my wife languishing away, I began to feel it would be best not to move too far away. On the other hand, we were no longer in need of a place close enough for the cat to come visit. But if we could just find a place with a view of the Zelkova tree, and since this was a neighborhood where high-rise buildings were not allowed, a tree of that size would be visible from quite a distance, certainly from a second-story window, and definitely from anything higher than that. Below the Zelkova tree, time had stopped at the little foot of a little pine tree. In its shadow, the most important of gems lay sleeping. Perhaps a window. Sorry. Perhaps a window with a distant view of the place would allow us to yield the natural process of forgetting. I went to the library and opened a book on geometry for the layman. I looked for the section on triangular surveying. There was a diagram providing a simple explanation of a method of surveying devised by people in the ancient times. This was the simplest way possible. To find an object's height, measure its shadow at the very moment when the length of surveyor's own shadow equals his actual height. According to another method, a stick is set upright near the object whose height is to be measured. Between the two objects and the two imaginary triangles equals to each other, the ratio of the height of the object to be measured to the height of the stick is identical to the ratio between the lengths of the two shadows. From this exact fact, one can calculate the height of the object. Either of the two methods could easily be performed in the garden during the morning hours when the sun shone in from the east. These are thought to be methods used by the Thales of Miletus to measure the height of the pyramids. There was only one difficulty in performing the task: the requirement that length of pyramid shadow be measured from the center of its lowest point. This corresponds precisely to the difficulty I face in measuring the Zelkova tree. Mainly, it would be impossible for me to measure the Zelkova's shadow from its exact center position, since, of course, I could not get into the neighbor's yard. However, the problem could be solved by making use of maps drawn to the scale produced with the use of high precision surveying. Knowing the measure of the top of the Zelkova tree, one could then go on to figure the location of the apartment and window required to obtain a view of the tree. In addition, one would of course have to obtain the height of the local topography and therefore the heights of windows, and then draw an imaginary triangle. Since windows in the gentle rise of some of the neighborhood street do not produce shadows, one would be required to use the following methods. The surveyor looks up and points to the thing that he would like to measure. Then he measures the angle from that point to the position of his arm when pointed horizontally, and with this angle, the coordinates of the peak of the triangle, the length of each of its sides, and the azimuth angle can then be determined. Finally, one adds the height of one's eyes. Next, one draws a straight line that connects the top of the Zelkova tree with the window of the new apartment. From this, one can calculate the height of any obstructions to one's view. If an obstruction is located directly in the line of sight, this means that whether it be a building, a patch of greenery, or the shape of the land itself, the Zelkova tree will not be visible from the window in question. Therefore, the strategic zone between viewing point and target, the high and lows of the terrain, must first be determined. The search area will of course be limited to the zone in which the Zelkova tree remains visible, but perhaps I had embarked on this line of thought merely to distract myself from my own anger and grief. It's not as if I was actually prepared to waste my time attempting to perform triangular surveying. I was merely seeking comfort in the thought that something as serenely transparent as an ancient surveying method might be applicable to this place of loss and bewilderment where I now found myself. Chapter 19. It was around this time that I began to realize how thoughtless I had been in sending over what I had written about Chibi. The series of essays, though shorter and in recognizably different styles, was essentially a rough draft of what would later become the first part of this novel. The first 3 chapters, in which the cat appears and begins to stay a while and play, I was beginning to get the feeling that by having sent the neighbors those magazines I had merely raised suspicions. But this isn't all that was thoughtless of me. From the viewpoint of the lady next door, it was as if she were suddenly being shown another part, a secret part of her own child's life which she had been unaware of until now. And right when she was still in the midst of sorrow of having lost this child, it would not be possible to go through the garden and see the Chibi's mother crying. It just wasn't allowed. There was no way we could expect her to share her grief with us. I attempted to surmise what neighbor lady's feeling might be in this situation, and I began to think that perhaps my thoughtlessness had been due to my lack of experience in this sort of things, or maybe some sort of immaturity on my part. Several months later, I abruptly submitted an essay which was to bring the series to a close, that covered the events corresponding to the point in the novel where the cat stopped coming over up to the discovery of her death. Though not well known, the small magazine was produced by a highly respected publisher and was sold in bookstores oriented towards serious literature. The reason this very proper lady did not get in touch with me again despite her promises to do so must have been because she was still much too stricken in anger and grief, and her resentment had obviously been directed at me. So when my essays arrived on top of that, it must have made things all the more complicated. Perhaps the main reason for her anger was the fact that we had been affectionate with Chibi and had become close to the cat without her knowledge and without her permission. But on the other hand, would the mere fact of shared affection lead directly to resentment? If the issue involved permission, then would things have been different if permission had been given? After all, a cat left outside on its own will cross any borders it wants. Or something about the fact of having it all put into print gave the neighbors an estranged or alienating feeling, as if the pet they had loved been adopted by strangers. This must have been the root of a kind of secondary resentment. But a piece of writing, no matter how you interpret it, isn't the same as an adoption. The act of writing also crosses the borders indiscriminately. Wouldn't there be a way to cleanse that thing looming between the neighbor and myself, to purify boundaries and all by performing an even closer examination of the issue through writing? We took a look at an apartment in a high-rise building located about half a mile to the south, but the windows did not face directly for a view of the Zalkova. We just walked home shaking our heads. As my wife and I walked down the lightning alley toward our small side gate, a man walked towards us, dressed in casual attire, his hands free of signs of being on the way back from work, such as a briefcase, and from the moment he began approaching us down the street, I noticed he had held his head stiffly, looking toward straight forward and never at us, with a scowl on his face. As he grew near, as he grew nearer, his neck twisted strenuously as his face turned towards us. At the moment he passed, his expression grew even more menacing. Once inside the house, my wife sighed with relief. I don't understand. Why such intense hatred? She asked. And then she explained to me that was the husband of the neighbor, and said that she had never been glared at like that by anyone in her whole life. My wife talked about how when she was in elementary school, her dog would often wander around the neighborhood on its own and was treated affectionately by the neighbors. She felt nothing but gratitude for the fact that the dog would be cared for by so many people around her. Why do they hate us so much for taking care of Chibi? Don't worry about it, we did the right thing. We didn't even touch her. Who knows? He may have been brooding about something else. Like what? Like maybe he's deeply in debt, and now it's all come due and it's at an excessively high interest rate, and he can't get back on his feet. So now he's at his wits' end and feels like taking it out on everyone else. That's the kind of expression that he had. Of course, this was all nonsense. And it was nonsense thinking it would make my wife feel any better. In the bath that night, I opened the window to let out the steam. Using the electric pump, I added water from the well, and as my skin began to feel smooth and slippery from the hot water, I suddenly remembered something from just before Chibi died. The fact that, since in fact she wasn't really my cat, also because she was always a spick and span, I never even thought of giving her a bath. But one night, Chibi crept up behind me as I scrubbed away. All doors along the approach to the bath were left open, even the outer door to the area with the packed earthen floor, since the bath was situated so that it was protected from view. So when she came to visit, I made an absurd little song, which I sang to her as I sat in the bathtub. Chibi, hot spring, Chibi the cat, the bathhouse attendant, rinse my back, run away with your little hands. In the garden, still light at this time of the evening, after the passing of the spring equinox, a plump thrush bathed itself in the pond. Soon, a small chickadee joined in, splashing around in the water as if imitating the other bird. The two of them kept splashing around for some time, again and again, climbing up upon the pond's edge only to jump back right in. Chapter 20. When the cat stopped coming, It seemed as if the garden had changed into something dreary and drab. How much we see through colored glasses, I thought. Spring soon reached its zenith and gave way to early summer. The various flowers almost seemed to be working in concert. The blooms of one variety would give way to the next as their colors changed from season to season, each time redecorating the colors. Preceded in the death of the old man only 3 months after they moved to the suburban elder care facility on the day of the Tanabata festival of the previous year, the old woman continued to call on occasion. As usual, we were most often left with some kind of task. Putting in a large order of Kuzuko starch at the little cake shop in the old part of town she had always patronized, for instance, or picking up some cold medicine at her regular clinic. Whenever she called us, she would always remind us, "Thank you, Fubuchu, for the follow. Thank you so much, and you get a free ara ara ara." Okay, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for an ara ara? 3, 2, 1. Ara ara, Fubuchu. There you go. That's your ara ara. Clip it, save it, do whatever you want with it. Thank you so much. It's fine. You don't have to be here. Just hang out with me. Oh, it's Nata de Coco. Aww. Hey. Okay, I'll try my best to remember. Fupuchi is Nata de Coco. Okay, I try my best. Okay, since you are Nata de Coco, I'm gonna. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna take a sip of tea. Since you're Nata de Coco and you're very special, I'm gonna give you yet another ara ara for Nata de Coco, okay? That's too much? if you continue, help me with P3S. I'll give you another ara ara. Now. Especially for Nata de Coco. Help me, please. I need to clear P3S, please. Yeah, you re-clear first and then you help me out with my pro, okay? Okay. And ara ara for Nata de Coco. Starting now. Ara ara. Nata de Coco-chan. There you go. There you go. There you go. Clip it, save it, do whatever you want. Oh my god. Help me, P3S, please. Onegaishimasu. No, that's disgusting. I can't be a degenerate all the time. Okay. I will DM you when DN set up a PF for my P3S Pro, but you go re-clear. Okay? Do your best. Ganbatte. Chapter 20. Let us continue. Whenever she called, she would always remind us, "Go ahead and use the big house anytime you want," repeating it like a mantra at the end of each telephone call. She must have felt Having the big house at our disposal was a compensation for asking us to leave by the end of August because of her situation with the inheritance tax, and we used it to our heart's content, just as she suggested. And go ahead and use the bath too, she would say. Since a bath had been added to the guest house behind the moon viewing window, there was nothing at all inconvenient about using our own. But the old woman said, "The bath at the big house is larger. You'll be more comfortable there." The memory I most associated with the bath of the main house was of something that had occurred during the previous year. Early on a summer afternoon, I heard shouts coming from the main house as I sat alone in my room writing. I rushed to see what was going on. The old woman's shouts were coming from the bath. The old man appeared to have just been getting out of the bath, and his body, bright pink like boiled lobster, was leaning over but remaining hanging on the edge of the bathtub. The old woman, wearing old-fashioned Japanese work pantaloons, was doing all she could to support him, but was trapped under his weight and could not budge. I hesitated for a moment, then placed my hand on the old man's naked body to help him get to his room. His skin was surprisingly soft, and considering how lean he was, still firm and healthy. There was no oiliness to it. He could almost have been a young schoolboy. With his eyes wide open, the old man chuckled, but seemed at loss for words. He no longer had the willpower to move on his own. Then, suddenly, his body went limp, and it was like carrying a dead weight. There seemed to be no way to handle him. I tried getting him on my back, then carrying him like a baby, but he was all arms and legs responding to the pull of gravity, merely slipping farther downward the more I tried to get a hold on him. In this stance, in the stance of a sumo wrestler, I tried the double arm grip and managed to get him upright, then became helpless to do more. This was what they mean when they talk about being between a rock and a hard place. There was no moving forward, and it was impossible to turn back. But we cannot stay like this forever, I thought. Then I remembered the gardeners who had just arrived that morning at a neighboring house down the road a bit to the north on Lightning Alley. You could still hear the repetitive sound of the garden clippers. I balanced the old man on the edge of the tub in a seated position and left the old woman to keep him propped up. Then, beads of sweat still dripping down my forehead, I ran out the side gate and into the alleyway, and from down the road called to the men up in the trees. Four men in puffed up workers' trousers and leggings slid down the tree, then, leaving the transistor radio behind with the little music blaring, one by one they stepped into the old couple's yard. As soon as they saw what was going on in the bath, they knew what to do. With a few words exchanged, they laid the old man down on his back, then each one grabs a limb, picked him up and silently carried him out via the veranda and left him in the bedroom on the west side of the house. Then they returned to the hallway to the entrance and work fixing their cloth work boots on their feet and left as quickly as they come, stepping through the front gate in a single file, and in a moment were back up in the trees. And then the sound of the garden clippers could be heard again, wafting across the treetops. Chapter 21. A year had gone by since they left the house on the day of the Tanabata festival, and around the end of May, the old woman returned home. This was the time of the year when the edge of the pond was crawling, with tadpoles sprouting arms and legs, and the little black frogs about the size of a bean populated the little garden. But the old woman was having difficulty recovering from an operation to remove cataract, and could not see all the leaps and bounds taking place around her, nor did she seem to notice that Chibi was no longer with us. But she did come over to the guest house for a visit and almost in tears thanked us for taking care of the house and the garden. She stayed only for 2 weeks. This was to be her last day, and she spent a little time each day putting the last of the furniture in order before it was sold off to antique stores. The old woman said she wanted to give us some items as keepsakes: the green ceramic brazier in the Ming style, which had been placed out in the garden, the large porcelain vase which had been displayed in an alcove, and the little lantern made of natural stones. The antique store people would be in and out for the next few days and would take everything unless we took them. All we wanted was the little stone lantern that Chibi often perched herself on top on the west side of the garden in the shade of some bushes. The shape of the lantern was somewhat humorous. It resembles a stack of three big rice cakes, like the ones you see displayed at New Year's, except that where normally they would be stacked in a pyramid, the smallest on top, this case the largest went on top and the smaller pieces below. On a refreshingly clear and sunny day just before the rainy season, a photo session had been arranged. Chairs were set up in the garden and azaleas were in full bloom. Several photographs were taken by the old woman, and then some more with my wife standing by her, posing back on the veranda. In one photo, they were posed as if they were two young girls frolicking and the old woman grasping both my wife's hands in hers. Then, on a morning in early June, the old woman returned to the apartment complex for the elderly and never again set foot in the house, but her tenants were unable to be there to send her off. As it turns out, on the same day, a ceremony was being held at an old temple out in the suburb of north of Tokyo commemorating the second anniversary of Y's death, and a special section of seats was reserved for close friends and fellow poets. Meanwhile, news suddenly arrived, and 2 days before the commemoration of the death of a highly respected older poet, whose funeral was now to be held on the very same day, I felt torn. The word to grieve or lament in Japanese is actually made up of two different kanjis: sadness and resentment. It seemed that here two very separate emotions get tangled up. Whenever a large number of people gather, flustered and confused around the occasion of a death, a lot of quick decisions are made according to consensus, which is fundamentally suspect. Often, within the time the limited time available, some decisions are made which one would have never dreamt of. In this case of Y's death, this was more or less how things proceeded from the night of the wake onward. And now, I found myself in an awkward position of having been chosen to officiate at this particular ceremony, or shall we say, forced, as it was one of those things one simply cannot refuse to do. Tasks were divided among friends and split between the two services which were to take place. The plan was to first attend the older poet's funeral at a temple in the north end of the city and then rush out to the suburb to the other commemorative ceremony. Because the schedule was so tight, I would have to leave the house before the old woman's planned departure. So, we were seen off instead. The old woman, who had never seen either one of us dressed in formal attire, was delighted to see my wife in morning dress and playfully grabbed onto her sleeve, saying repeatedly, "Oh, he looks wonderful, my dear, just divine." Then, almost breaking into a song, she insisted, I don't like. I don't really like being seen off away anyway. Meanwhile, we just couldn't seem to find a new apartment. There was simply no comparison with what we had now. Everything we looked at was so small and cramped, expensive and drab. We came to realize just how much the housing market had changed in the last 3 or 4 years. On the assumption that land prices could only keep rising, people went on with their lives without ever questioning what was going on around them. And the practice of using real estate as collateral to take out a loan and then to use the cash for speculative investment was simply taken for granted. Both real estate values and stock prices continued to rise, and change was evident even in our sleepy little neighborhood. At the counter of the local shop, one would often overhear young couples discussing plans to speculate in real estate. They would buy a piece of property and then sell it for a profit within the space of a few years. Flipping, they call it. You could change seats and sit in a different part of the restaurant and find yet another pair talking about the same thing. That was the time we're like back then. Our search for a new apartment gradually wandered farther and farther from our original plan of looking for something in the vicinity of our old house, moving in an outward spiral from the Zelkova tree. Even if we went with the current trend, buying rather than renting, that would mean we would have to go even farther out into the suburb before we could find anything that was even close to being affordable. With an eager young real estate salesman as our guide, we were led around a suburb about 40 minutes outside the city center on the express commuter train. And in the course of viewing a variety of properties, we were given vicarious peeks into the private lives of total strangers. Everything from a condominium where a woman was disturbingly clean, leave alone, keeping the place extremely tidy on the assumption that she would be reselling it soon, to the home of a professional baseball player for all intents and purpose an absent father, overflowing with stuffed animals sent home as souvenirs. As we went around trying the various spots on the realtors list, I found myself seriously wondering at what point the situation would really change. It was like staring hard in the dark room and never quite making things out. Having failed in his attempts to alter the course in the Arno in order to prevent its flooding, a challenge taken up in cooperation in Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli wrote the following poem. The river's fierce current is wild, extremity attained, crushing all manners of things, wherever it reaches, making one side high and another low. It carves away the bluffs, altering riverbed and river bottom, overflowing as if to do battle with Mother Earth. Fortune also is unkind, boldly her long tresses disarranged, now here, now there, one after the other, transform all things. Was the goddess Fortuna going on a rampage? Tossed about by her rough waves, moving from one place to place, how were we going to manage to find the right current, the one that would lead us to a new home? In my despair, I decided to approach the problem with a sense of detachment. Chapter 22. In mid July, as the seasonal rains came to an end, the blue figure of a white-tailed skimmer dragonfly appeared on a large rock beside the pond in a perfect spot to catch the sun. Could it be the offspring of the schemer who, in the summer of the previous year, came back again and again to kiss the arc of the water produced by the spray from the hose? United in the shape of a distorted heart, the blue and yellow male and female had flown from branch to branch among the trees. Could this be their child, now emerged from its pupa? The male skimmer and I become friends with had vanished become friends with had vanished by the end of August. For a while I regretted the disappearance of my wing friend and his wife from the garden, which had now been also left behind by the old man and the old woman. But I felt as if that same skimmer had been brought back to life along with the bright light of summer. Then, between the effacement of death and this birth, was a sense of kind of rebirth. I found vividly recalled to me those who had left and would never return. Good morning, King TC, or good evening to you, King TC. Thank you so much for dropping by. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Noodible's back. Yeah, I'm back at reading again. I'm glad people are enjoying it. I hope you guys are enjoying it because I'm enjoying it. As July 2 approached its end, I found my eyes wandering towards the large rock extending out over to the pond each time I went into the garden under the intense afternoon sun. But there was no sign of the white-tailed skimmer. Then I would clap my hands together lightly, as I used to, and from out of nowhere a shadow would nonchalantly fly over this way, ever so slightly rippling the air. If I made an arc of water with the hose, the skimmer would fly around as if filled with glee and then come in even closer, just like the just the like just the like the one before it, skillfully avoiding the spider webs which could be found everywhere. He appeared to be living in an expansive existence, making use of every corner of the garden, even as it lapsed into the decline. Suddenly I had a thought. I put down the hose and turned off the water and stretched out my left arm with my index finger pointing up in the air. Then the skimmer took a wide turn, coming back around toward me. He quickly approached, and after first pivoting in yet another direction, came in, aligning himself in the direction my finger pointed, and finally alighting there. I was overjoyed and held my breath. It's him. It must be him. It's been a long time, though a year had gone by quickly, there in the deserted garden, so isolated from its surrounding as to produce an almost otherworldly atmosphere. For a brief moment, I held on my finger to those two great compounds of eyes and four transparent wings. The slightest movement of my body sent him back up dancing in midair, but in only a moment he returned and again alighted on my finger. And then there are a few more timeless moments of stillness. A brown-eared bulbul came down from one of the branches of the zelkova in the neighbor's yard to the east, let out a shrill cry, and then flew off again. Startled, the skimmer flew away and did another round of the garden. But I left my finger pointed up in the air, and keeping as still as I could, waited for a while. Then The schema first set itself on a spot a couple of yards away, and again returned to my finger. Chapter 23. One night, we slept over in the parlor of the big house. Early in the morning, I thought I heard someone out on the veranda sharpening a kitchen knife. The harsh rays of the late summer sun combed through the thick foliage of the Zelkova tree and poured into the garden. The sound seemed very close, yet when I looked outside, no one was there. I slipped into a pair of wooden clogs and walked into the direction of the sound. It seemed to be coming from the grass growing around the roots of a plum tree near the house. I stared hard to make out what lay between the blades of grass, and a giant praying mantis turned toward me, a cicada with its wings still unfurled, held firmly between its front legs. I have to say that the praying mantis is by far my least favorite of all creatures. The sound I heard, like a whetstone scraping against a knife, was the sound of the wings of the dying cicada. Or it could have been the menacing sound of the praying mantis' wings as it carried out its assault on its prey. With the image of this grisly event seared into my brain, I went back to bed, but even as I regained my breath, I could still hear the sound. Then my wife, who by now was also awake, asked me what was going on. When I told her what I had just witnessed, she jumped up and ran out onto the veranda, grabbing the bamboo futon beater which has been left there. Then she descended to the stepping stones into the garden with her bare feet and pajamas. I followed her into the garden, and by the time I had caught up with her, she had tossed the praying mantis separated from its prey into the azaleas. She then rested the limped cicada on the palm of her hand. It looked for a moment as if he was finished, but then the cicada began making a sound with its green speckled wing, and, at first, faltering somewhat, took flight, almost hitting the ground at one point, but then recovering, and the wings beating rapidly flew up high over the fence on the west side of the garden. I suppose the second human who came along this morning must have been like a god to the cicada. The first one was an idiot. Then she got a surprised look on her face and seemed to be running some thought around and around in her brain. My wife felt very close to animals, but there was one kind of animal that she viscerally disliked: ducks. Perhaps if a cicada were being attacked by a duck, the idiot in me would have become a god and save it. But if the duck were attacking a praying mantis, or if in the unlikely event a praying mantis was throttling a duck, I suppose the two of us would just stay in bed shaking until the whole thing was over. Funny, these aversions we have for certain things. It does make you wonder a bit whether it's some kind of karmic connection with a past life experience, even if that's just a bit too weird. In any case, let us simply assume that having gotten through this crisis, the cicada was able to live out the rest of its short life to the fullest. And for the praying mantis, well, I don't really want to think about the praying mantis. Around this time, we at last found a new place to live. At some point, we had gotten into the habit of sleeping in the large parlor of the main house, which would most likely soon to be sold and then demolished. We were now getting our last taste of the place as our lives fell into a disarray of cardboard boxes in preparation for the move. Chapter 24. It was the last Saturday of August and the night before our scheduled move. At some point, without our having noticed, the gap left open at the foot of the wooden fence which formed the border between our house and the neighbors to the east, which in the past had only been partially covered in mesh, was completely repaired. With a new sheet of wire mesh now covered in the entire opening, meanwhile, it seemed as though some creature had wandered out of the house next door into the area between the wire mesh. It seemed it was a kitten. For the first time in quite a while, I heard the neighbor woman's voice. I took a rest from packing and strained my ears to listen. Look, they are like jewels. Uh huh. The cat head was apparently below the eaves, close to the house in the backyard, which was also near the little passageway through the border. There was nothing to worry about. The cat would not go next door. This was more or less the gist of the conversation between the mother and child. The cat's eye must have been glowing in the growing darkness. She has such pretty eyes, don't you think? Apparently, she was looking out from the entry of the house. I could hear the voice of the little boy next to her. From the window on the south side of the house, I could see the light from a flashlight move this way and that. There was really nothing to be bitter about, but it did make me think of Chibi. So they have a new cat now. My wife also noticed and seemed a bit uneasy. The room had reached the pinnacle of chaos, and we finished packing. But no matter how much we worked at it, seemingly out of nowhere, objects continued to appear. We had to call the movers more than once as work progressed during the day. The order to order more boxes, and in the end, we needed over 100 boxes. Most of it was books we just couldn't part with, and bric-a-brac collected over the years. The endless job of packing is so exhausted me that I almost burst into something between a scream and insane laughter. But then, something began to push me into the opposite direction. For my wife, mainly, it was said that a certain someone once cared for her. Since someone once cared for by her family would now be forgotten at the foot of a little pine tree. But not just but not only that. Just by moving away, we also will be joining sides with those who forget. This was simply unbearable. Finding a new cat would be the quickest and most effective meaning of soothing the sadness. This was the accepted wisdom, and it appeared that the neighbors had resorted to that approach. So they had carefully, even rigorously repaired the wire mesh, covering the gap left open in the boundary dividing their yard from the outside so that the past events would not be repeated. Then they went out and got a cat. We also began to drop by local pet shops in passing to take a peek at their shop windows. But each time we did this, my wife just shook her head. No matter how cute and lovable the cats might be, it just wasn't the same. This was an indication that the essential something which still connected. Yeah, I know. Uh, yeah? Sorry, my cat wants to communicate. Hmm? Oh, yeah. Don't worry, he has food. He's just being whiny. Whiny. Okay. Uh, Stop! Oh my god. This was an indication that essential something which still connected her to Chibi like an invisible thread. Then one day, as we rode our bikes, one behind the other, to a distant neighborhood, my microphone! Stop! Okay. We stumbled upon several kittens which appeared to belong to someone on a little side street we never ventured down before. My wife was stopped in her tracks and got off her bike to take a closer look at the little fuzzy creatures. Shall I go talk to the people here if we can have one? I asked the question with emphasis. She thought for a while and then said, "No, it's just not the same." She laughed sadly and stood up to leave. We stacked the cardboard boxes that we had stuffed with all our belongings in the spacious parlor of the big house, and no sooner had we done so than the guest house again was filled with boxes. One box remained untouched in the corner of the tatami room, its cover left open. A towel was laid in the bottom of the box, and a dish smelling of horse mackerel was set down there along with it. Chapter 25. What we finally found was a low-rise condominium set back in the grove of the Zelkova trees. We had searched far and wide, even going out to the farthest western reaches of the city, and then, empty-handed, we had found ourselves turning back and starting all over again near our own neighborhood. It was in the middle of July and our deadline was the end of August, so we mounted our bicycle and went around to every realtor we can find in the area. Then, suddenly, I was reminded of how we had found the old woman's guest house 4 years ago. We had dropped by We had dropped in at the realtor just outside the local train station, and my wife immediately laid her eyes on a property whose information had just recently been pasted up on the bulletin board. We asked about it and told it was on the third floor of a rental condominium in a setting that was like being out in the woods. We pedaled out to see it right away on our bicycle. It was an apartment building with 3 floors containing 40 units. Next to it was an open space planted with trees which were preserved by the local district government. There was a row of about 20 huge Zelkova trees, and to the east there was a neighborhood consisting of old traditional houses, and it was midday between the two local stations and near a railroad crossing. Probably the reason the natural wooded area had been preserved, we were told that there had been a golf driving range there up a few years previous to our discovering it. The rent was double what we had been paying at our old place, and we would require a guarantor who could vouch for our income, and of course, no pets were allowed. We had searched for a way to buy a place, but each time we found ourselves lamenting our financial situation, which almost got us there, but not quite. And to top it off, it seems that we were always shown places that were considerably run down. But soon, we realized this had become the norm. I recall that the last time we looked for a new apartment, as well as the time before that, things just hadn't been like this in the city. Even in our neighborhood, we started to notice a growing number of older houses being ready for demolition so that shiny new condominiums can be built in their place. Having seen more than our share dumps, we were not exactly in the position to turn up our noses at apartment complex enveloped in greenery. And it was only 7 minutes walk with fineness at Chibi's Zelkova. And who knew, maybe the rustling leaves of the Zelkova tree outside our window would bring us the visions of Chibi's own tree. It was early August, and several days had passed since shelling out the deposit. I decided to take a walk alone, found myself wandering towards the place where we would soon be living. Entering the property, I looked up at the dense foliage and green of the Zelkova trees, leaves rustling in a light breeze. On the south side of the L-shaped building was a green belt closed off with a fence and a gate so that one normally could not enter. The apartment we would be renting was located on the third floor, accessed via a staircase set into the right angle of L shape. A family was still living there, so I strained my neck to look up the window facing north. I could hear their excited chatter about how they would all be moving into their own house soon. A real house. Circling around the building, to the right there was an empty lot that had not yet been cleared for new construction. I walked into the uneven surface of the lot when suddenly there among the weeds appeared a skinny mother with 4 kittens suckling at her belly. Startled by the sound of footsteps, the 4 kittens, which could not have been more than a month, sprang from their mother's teats and scattered. Then, stopping where they were, looked back at me. Meanwhile, the mother cat, though, maintaining a healthy suspicion, remained just where she was, striking an attitude of majestic composure. The entire right side of her face was white, while the left was black, producing a unique pattern. Her kittens, who stood transfixed around her, were each a variation of a team, but all in all were the kind of cats one tended to see around the area quite often, the spotted variety if you will, whose fur was white with round or nearly brown splotches of color of India ink. Not wanting to ruin their meals, I turned on my heel and retreated. We moved at the end of August. The old woman's house was to have gone on sale soon after that, but apparently they could not find a buyer immediately due to the disagreement on the terms. Somehow, it seemed as if a major collapse was on its way. I called the old woman at her new home in the suburbs to tell her that we had moved just 10 minutes away from the old house, and she seemed delighted. Could you drop by and check on things from time to time? I will feel a lot more comfortable if you do. So I took the key and went inside the abandoned gates. I stood there alone for a long time. The old woman and the old man were gone. My wife and the cat also were no longer there. And I, too, was already gone. Chapter 26. The 4 kittens flitted around the shrubbery in addition to the black and white mother. There was the father cat with dark grey fur, unusual to see in stray cats, but whole family intact inhabited the area. When autumn came, the mother cat would no longer be found, and the shadow of leaves and bounds seemed to have also declined in the bushes from the original 4 to only 3 kittens. One of them looked a bit like Chibi, with the same pattern of spots on its fur. We began to call this little group of 3 cats the Chibi Chibis. The 3 kittens and their father were always loitering around the entrance of the building. To be precise, one of the kittens, always the same one, would position herself between the planters in the location where she would not get in the way of people entering or leaving. She would sit there politely, paws tucked in front. The remaining 3, including the father cat, would stay hidden in the shadow of the azaleas. How their roles have been decided, I did not know, but it seems the idea was for the best looking of the kitten to attract residents' attention. Thinking she was cute, they would leave scraps near the concrete border of the of the of one of the planters. Then the other three cats would emerge from behind to take the scraps. The pretty kitten didn't take any for herself. Only after the others had eaten and settled down would she have her own meal. We call the prettiest member of the three Chibi Chibis Big Sister, or the toughest we named Shiro, for his almost completely white fur. The clumsiest of the three we call Kappa, since his tortoiseshell markings reminded us of the river spirit of traditional folklore. The father cat, always calm and serious, we simply called Papa. There was no doubt that the big sister looked like Chibi, but no matter how hard you look, on earth or in heaven, there was no cat as otherworldly and mysterious as Chibi. In contrast, Big Sister had a down to earth quality, as well as soft and tranquil nature. She was shaped a bit like a pear and had short tail. It was almost as if she had been pulled out of an animated film, and that gave her a certain attraction. Arriving back home, my wife would announce the group's activities. Big sister's out there again. She's a cutie, isn't she? I'll bring her a little something. It seemed almost like old times when Chibi would come over to our house and we would play in the garden. Soon, autumn deepened and feeding the cats had become our daily routine. There were other residents who were fond of cats and left scraps, but for my wife, it was on a whole different level. One night, she announced, "I'm going outside to play with the cats." She took out some dried sardine and then got the ping pong ball out of Chibi's old box in the closet. But then, after a while, she came back despondent. She won't play. Even when I put the ball right in front of her, she won't try batting it once. She doesn't seem to understand the concept of play. And she got that look on her face again, the one she got when she was thinking of Chibi. Then, around the same time the autumn leaves began to blow around the apartment's ground, Big Sister started to play. The family of strays became accustomed to getting late night snacks. Then, in the wee hours when none of the other residents were around to see, my wife would go out to play with Big Sister. The ping pong ball didn't bounce well on the asphalt surface of the floor, so we tied a string to the end of a stick, and on the other hand, the string tied to a little snowman doll. My wife would pull and shake the string and play all around the entrance of the building with Big Sister. The other cats just watched from the safety of the shrubs. In the midst of play, Big Sister would suddenly crouch and shake her head vigorously, then cough a really bad sounding cough, and the whole time her coughing echoed throughout the entrance. Both my wife and the other cats looked on with worried expression. One night in mid-February, Big Sister followed the snowman doll all the way to the dreaded third floor of the building. From the crack in the metal door, she peered inside to see what was there. We didn't want to force her to come in, so we just propped the door open with the sandal and left it up to her to do whatever she wanted to do. Quietly, quietly and gingerly, she tiptoed around the room, taking each detail of her first inside view of a human house. Then, our guest, like others before her, slipped back through the door without a word, quickly descended the stairs to return to her outdoor family. My wife followed her outside and downstairs to the building entry. Crouching on the ground's grandfather's cat was waiting for her. In my wife's very eyes, he batted Big Sister on the head once with his big paw. big sister shut her eyes and let out a small cry. The next day, we went on a trip, leaving the apartment empty for a week. It was to attend a relative's wedding in Kyushu, where we both grew up, so we decided to make it a homecoming visit and take time to see our families. My wife's hometown was in the same province as mine, and on the way back she stopped to visit her folks, and I took the night train home by myself. The entry to the apartment complex had a roadway for cars to enter one side and pedestrian entrance on the other. The cat family tended to stay within the earshot of the entryway and the shrubs on the side of the road, but would never venture inside the brightly lit hall where the mailboxes were located. As I turned the corner where the landlord lived and approached the building, I wondered if the cats had managed to get enough to eat while we were gone. The night's darkness increased as I walked beneath the thick foliage of the Zelkova tree, and then I saw the bright light of the entryway float up before me. It was the only well-lit spot on the ground of the building. As I walked up to the door, a small white form bounded out of darkness and into the fluorescent light, running toward me and meowing all the way. Chapter 27. Big sister began coming upstairs to the third floor on her own whenever she wanted to. Every once in a while she would shake her head back and forth like a papier-mâché doll and let out a series of bad-sounding coughs. We worried about how she would get through the cold weather in this shape. We always propped open the door with a sandal so she could leave whenever she wanted, but a couple of days into the New Year's holiday, we began closing it. We bought a plastic box, and filled it with cat litter. It was our first official It was our first official shopping expedition for the new year. Then my wife suggested, why don't we bring Kappa up too? He always lagged behind the other family members and was timid and unsteady on his feet. Kappa seemed the least capable of surviving outdoors. My wife appeared to be moving to the direction of adopting the whole family, but keeping even for one for the night, constantly meowing because she wasn't used to staying inside with humans, was already causing enough of a problem. And since pets were not allowed in the building unless that also meant that we would be prepared for the possibility of getting kicked out. And on top of that, Kappa did not look like he was anywhere sorry. And on top of that, Kappa did not look like he was anywhere near prepared to climb the stairs to the third floor on his own. He didn't even show any signs of responding to the snowman doll when it was dangled before him in the bushes. Bringing him up would necessitate devising a clever new strategy. We had never kept a skylark or any kind of other bird for a pet, but for whatever reason we owned a bird cage made especially made for a skylark. It was an old piece of bamboo workmanship shaped something for an elongated cylinder. So that it would stood quite tall when placed vertically, as originally designed. I suggested fixing the door with the cage with a device that would cause it to close, trapping whatever creature that might enter inside, placing the cage empty in the empty lot in the middle of the night with some food to act as a bait, and then waiting in the shadows for the cat to come. As it turned out, the person who proposed the strategy, yours truly, ended up being the one who to carry it out. On a cold night during the first week of New Year, Kappa approached the bird cage. He circled the cage a few times, examining it before quietly stepping through the open door. But then something unexpected happened in the mind of the would-be capture. I somehow couldn't bring myself to pull the string. If I were to close the cage door now, Kappa would be frightened and upset, and probably put up with a violent struggle. And then the cage would fall over and roll around the ground, becoming an even more frightening place to be stuck in. And then how could Kappa truly become ours, having come to us through such a traumatic experience? All I had to do now was to pull the string, and the cage door would come down, but I couldn't do it. Kappa cautiously ate the food inside the cage, and in his usual clumsy way, turned around inside the cage. Then he gazed in my direction, with those round eyes giving no hint of suspicion. Stepping through the dreaded entrance, looked at me again. After a slow start, he began to move into a gallop, bound, bounded across the pavement under the bare Zelkova tree, and ran off the property. Gazing intently in the sleeping cat on the same sofa where Chibi used to sleep, wearing a collar quite similar to Chibi's with coma head beads. My wife sighs. She's mine. Yet, despite her satisfaction, it looked like it was going to be a while before it would be possible to hold the cat and pet her. And while we would have to take her to the vet soon for shots and whatnots, but in any case, we decided that we should first give her a proper name. Chapter 28. Since the mid 80s, stock prices in real estate had continued to skyrocket. But the first half of 1990s, things began to collapse. It was the beginning of autumn, and when I heard that the old woman had put up the house for sale, already the economy was showing signs of slipping. By 1991, the reality of the situation had become obvious. The bloated economy had completely collapsed, throwing the entire country into confusion. Then August came. As I sat half-heartedly watching television, a commercial for a major home builder came on. I could hear the eerily calm voice of the narrator saying, "What a father passes on to his children." And then, building homes is like raising children. In front of the house with a traditional gate shaded by the branch of a pine tree, a father places his hand on, on the head of a very young boy. The two bowed to the passerby and exchanged greetings with a smile. The scene was shown in black and white. Somehow, the wooden fence, which could be seen behind them, looked familiar to me. I took out the walk to double check, and I could tell that the commercial definitely featured the house where we first once lived, by the pattern of the stain of the mud wall, all and the way the bamboo slats were laid. You could see right through the commercial. Obviously, the housing industry was trying to make a sudden change in direction from its recent tendency of encouraging people to sell older houses like this one and buy new ones so that they can take advantage of the skyrocketing real estate prices. The old house was merely a prop to give the new estate company a clean image, while in actual fact it sat there silently awaiting demolition. So, late that summer, using the pass key, which I still had in my possession, I went inside for a last look. The garden was smothered in tall weeds, and the pond was all dried up. There was no sign of its former charm or of all the animals which used to fill it. What happened to the dragonflies and the praying mantis? Now overgrown, the Japanese holly and the azaleas has lost their perfectly pruned round shapes and deflated into oddly distorted hemisphere. Only the rose of Sharon, winding its way up the wall of the tool shed, was in bloom, swaying in the soft light of the summer's end. In December of 1991, we visited the old woman at her condominium in the suburbs out west in the city. There, during 3 hours of pleasant chat, the subject of real estate was barely touched upon. As it turns out, She had been forced to sell the house at a price much lower than she had originally hoped. Finally, it had been split into three parcels and sold. Demolition was set to begin in the middle of January the coming year. A few days later, she asked us to check on how things were going at the house. A section of fence lining the alley had collapsed. It was leaning over into the garden. I just propped it back up as a stopgap measure. Nothing you could really call a repair. 3 days into the new year, the last few odds and ends at the old house were being cleaned up, and so we decided to drop by once more and transplant to a pot some new reef spire they had let us plant in the garden and take it home with us. When we arrived, we discovered that the keyhole had been plugged and there was no way for us to open the front gate. So my wife slipped through the little space left open in the gate and when I had propped it up and let me in through the side gate. The boundless growth of wild grass which covered the gardens in the summer had dried up and now was in its very sense of abandoned. Metal markers that looked like spikes had been driven into the ground midway across the garden. You could tell how they were dividing up the land from these markers. The trees were all drastically cut, and my eyes were pierced by the plum branches and the only ones sprouting buds. Looking up at the clear blue wintry sky, you could see the bare branches of the Zelkova tree swaying in the garden, its bark sparkling like oxidized metal. While my wife dug up the reef spire, I rolled up the rattan mat that we had left in the middle of the hardwood floor of the guest house and tied a string around it. I remembered vividly the daily arrival of our guest through the floor-level window, so much that I could even point out exactly where she had first set foot. On the 16th of January, I went back again. Scaffolding had begun to set up around the house. An orange tarp had been hung up all along the fence, covering the entire property. There would be no more images forming of people passing along the alleyways through the knot hole in the fence. Demolition was to be carried out over the next 5 days. On the last day of January, it rained all afternoon, and by evening it had turned to snow. The snow fell silently and steadily. I had shut myself away all day working, so for a change of pace, I went out with my wife into the white night and on to the local shopping district. After a bite, thank you, Yuzhong. Thank you for the reminder. After a bite to eat, we found ourselves walking in the direction of the old house. The snow was falling thick now, and our feet made a crunching sound as we trudged along through the cold night air. We passed wordlessly by the house with the Japanese plume grass, then descended the slope until there, on the left, where the old mansion used to be, was a huge vacant lot. The neighbor's house and the lightning alley were now completely exposed to view from the main thoroughfare. The snow continued to fall. There it lay in the darkness, a raw, open space covered by a sheet of pure white. Chapter 29. A writer acquaintance, whom I shall refer to simply as H, lived just a minute walk down at Lightning Alley towards South End. I had never had the occasion to visit before, but we had begun a collaboration, so now we would often take the same train home. H had moved to the area with his family in the 1950s when he was only 5 years old, and he could remember a time when there were still farms in the area. A creek used to cut across the fields just before the slope, and it would flood whenever it rained heavily. When I asked him about the alleyway, he let out a chuckle and said, "It's kind of a strange place, isn't it? For years and years, there was such an interesting collection of people living there, right on that one little street. A sculptor, printmaker, zoologist, geologist, musician, photographer of Buddhist statuary." And then H told me something quite unexpected. Apparently, the family who once been Chibi's owners had moved to the suburb to a magnificent house, sitting in the shade of a huge Zelkova tree. I had thought that they would always remain there, but apparently they had their reasons, their children's schooling or something like that. But in any case, it seemed as if Chibi had been left all alone now. I remember it was the night of the full moon on the 11th of March when Chibi died. Since then, every year on that date, late at night, I walked with my wife to the spot where she was found, lying on the ground in front of the house with the Japanese plume grass just before the entryway. We choose an hour when there are few passerby, and when the time is right, we place a few dried sardines on the ground and kneel down and place our hands together. Then we take a leisurely walk down to our former abode. I have come to realize that during this entire 10 years, each time I have joined my hands together, join my hands there together there, I have never been able to believe even once that she was hit by a car. I haven't spoken to my wife about this. It was always a quiet street. Whether we are talking about a car which has just crossed the street where most of the traffic is and turned onto this road heading downhill, or one which is headed up the hill and reached its intersection, this is right at the point where drivers were forced to slow down. So whenever I have visited this spot, I crouch down on the ground, placing my hands together in prayer with my back to the passing cars. I have always thought Chibi would have been able to dodge a car with no problem. And then there was another thing I had just noticed as I reshaped this loose collection of essays and journals notes into a novel. The 11th of March fell on a Sunday that year. It had been the evening of a Saturday, the 10th, when we had gone to the lightning catcher exhibit. We returned home a little later, after 10 that night, and found that the cat food in the dish placed in the box in the corner of the Japanese tatami room had decreased somewhat. On Sunday, the 11th, there were no signs Chibi had touched the horse mackerel or had disturbed the cotton cloth covering the floor level through which she would enter the house. According to the notes I took down in my pocket memo book, it was after 11:30 on the night of the 11th that the woman found her lying on the ground, not the 10th, according to her story. Just shortly before then, around 11, Chibi had apparently been asleep with her family. This is also according to the neighbor's explanation. How events unfold depend on an infinite numbers of mundane factors that were interconnected by virtue of their order of occurrence, and without which said event could not have occurred. But memory is less precise. Just before leaving for the exhibit, I saw Chibi, her back turned to me. It was the last time I would see her, and because of this, I had always mistakenly assumed it was 11:30 on the 10th when she was found lying on the street. And then, based on that, I went on to make another mistaken assumption. that the reason we set the anniversary of her death on March 11th was because by that morning she would have been unmistakably dead, cold, and stiff. I suppose I was so disturbed by the reality of death that I was somehow not seeing the essentials. As I approached the final phase of this book, I found myself going over the events as they unfolded and finally became aware of this point. What this means is that between the hours of 10 p.m. on March 10th and 11 p.m. on March 11th, Chibi was safe. And yet, she did not come see us. She used to come over so frequently. She came every day, and even if she were hurt, she would come over to show us where she was hurt. And yet, even though she was safe, on that one day alone, she did not come. How could that be? And yet, that is indeed the truth. So in other words, Chibi spent the last day of her life in a wholly different way than she ever had before. All I want to know is what happened. I want to somehow grasp every detail of the event of that day. That one day, like a tiny dewdrop. But now, it's all engulfed in the profound darkness of time. I never go that way on my own. The words of the neighbor woman speaking of the house with the Japanese plume grass now stick in my mind, and I have them written down here in my book. That is the end of The Guest Cat by Takashi Hiraide. Thank you so much for being with me throughout this whole book. Very meta, huh? It's a very meta book. Don't cry, Deanne. In every life there is death. Speaking of which, my cat has been coughing suspiciously for a while now. I'm gonna bring my cat to the vet tomorrow and I'm very nervous about it. But he should be fine. He looks healthy as hell. Alright. Do you guys want to know what's the book that I'm gonna read on Friday? Or do you want me to review it on Friday? That is the question. Book review. Should I reveal it here or should I reveal it on my Twitter? That is also another question. Thank you so much for all of you who are listening and also to those who are in game. Oh, everyone, thank you. Thank you, Exia, for being here. Thank you. And thank you, Natade Coco. And thank you, Deanne, as usual, for taking care of me and the party finder and stuff. Thank you so much. I chose a casual garb because of the casual look. I don't know. What do you guys think? Exia wants a... Okay, you can choose from page 10 to page 128. he really wants to go out, but I can't let him out yet because there are cleaners outside, and there the front door is open and it's dangerous. He will always run away. Page 10 to 128. 24. Ooh, 24. You are so unlucky. 24 is an illustration, so you can choose 23 or 26. It's a very nice illustration too. "26. From the book Valkyries. A quote on love by Paulo Coelho. Selected quotations. They are not poems, they are quotations. Number 26. A quote on love for Exia. Despite all the injustices we suffer, despite the bad things that happen to us, despite feeling incapable of changing, what is wrong about us and the world? Love is stronger than all of that and will help us grow. And only then will we be able to understand the stars, angels, and miracles. That is your quote on love by Paulo Coelho. As usual, I read it again. Despite all the injustices we suffer, despite the bad things that happen to us, despite feeling incapable of changing, what is wrong about us and the world? Love is stronger than all of that and will help us grow. And then only will we be able to understand stars, angels, and miracles. I hope you enjoyed that one. Oops, sorry. Aww. Anything else you guys want to claim? Poetry? It's so big. Of all things. Of all things, you have to claim that one. I like how I like how you can hear Strudel's voice. Strudel's sniggering in the background as well. Oh my god. Anything else you guys want to claim? You have 2 more minutes before I close the stream. One more minute. Okay, once again, thank you everyone for dropping by today to listen to me. Finishing up Takashi Hiraide's The Gas Cat. It's a pretty meta book. Pretty nice, quaint. I think most books that I tend to like to read are like very sad and sappy and realistic, I guess. That's why I bought three new books that I'm going to read. That I hopefully it's gonna be something different and not as sappy. I don't know, cause I've never read all these books before. But on I think I'm gonna review it on Friday. Okay, I'm gonna review it on Friday on what book that I'm gonna read, and I'm gonna continue. I'm gonna read that book here in my own residence. But the book after that, I'm going to read it at the end's residence, which is going to be turned to a bakery venue, basically. Oh my god! Oh, stop it, you guys! Oh my god, what is going on? Stop being naked in my house, Jesus Christ! Oh my god, what's going on? Holy shit! This fucking Aura and Alafel beating each other up. I don't understand what's going on. And Exia is just like stun shock over there. Jesus Christ. You guys are stupid. Oh my god. Oh my god, you guys. Oh god. Oh my god, you guys. Silly! So silly! I'm gonna let my cat out. My cat's like crying. Alright. Um, I stream Noodibles on every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning at 11 a.m. GMT plus 8. I try to stick to that schedule. It was just unfortunate that last week I went off grid. But all is good, all is fine. I'm not sure if Borderlands going to happen this week, but I hope in one way or another. If Borderland happens, that means it's a very, very good news. If Borderland doesn't happen, that means it's a very, very bad news. But either way, new book on this coming Friday, 27, 11 a.m. GMT plus 8 at my new place, Empyrean, Thornberry server, Empyrean, Ward 9, Plot 6. We'll be reading a new book and I'll review it on the day itself. Thank you so much once again for being here with me, for being great listeners, for spending your precious time with me. I appreciate it so much and I love all of you. You guys give me a reason to wake up every day, and I really, really, really appreciate it. So, thank you. I love all of you. Have a great day ahead. Have a great day. I love you.